Millionaire laughed when she said he was the father. 10 years later, he watches his son call another man Dad. Maxwell Reed stood frozen in place, his expensive Italian shoes rooted to the pavement outside Ravinia Park. 20 feet away, a teenage boy with dark curls caught the evening light as he waved a concert program excitedly. Dad, the first violinist signed my program. She said I asked the best question during the Q&A. That's fantastic, Elijah, replied the distinguished man beside him, beaming with unmistakable pride. Maxwell couldn't breathe. The boy's profile, the animated way he gestured, the slight furrow between his brows as he concentrated. It was like looking at his own childhood photographs. This was his son. The son he'd laughed about a decade ago when Sierra told him she was pregnant. The son he'd dismissed and denied. The son who was now calling another man Dad. Have you ever witnessed the consequences of your worst decision play out before your eyes? That moment when you realize what you threw away can never be reclaimed? 10 years ago, millionaire hotel magnate Maxwell Reed laughed in Sierra Montgomery's face when she told him she was pregnant with his child. Today, he stands paralyzed as he watches the son he rejected call another man Dad with love and trust in his eyes. What does it truly mean to be a father? And what happens when the family you could have had build something beautiful without you? Stay with me to witness a powerful story of rejection, resilience, and the family bonds that transcend biology. Maxwell couldn't tear his eyes away from the scene before him. The woman standing beside the boy and man was unmistakably Sierra. She looked different now, more confident, somehow more fully herself than the woman he remembered. Her hand rested comfortably in the crook of her companion's arm, her smile easy and genuine as she watched their interaction. Their interaction. The thought struck Maxwell with unexpected force. This was Sierra's family now, the boy he'd rejected, the man who'd stepped into the role Maxwell had abandoned. The three of them connected by bonds of choice rather than mere biology. As Elijah continued explaining something about bow technique to the man, his father in every way that mattered, Maxwell noticed how the boy's expressions mirrored his own. The way his hands moved when he was excited. The slight tilt of his head when making a point. These were Maxwell's mannerisms, living on in a child he'd never known. A child who called another man Dad. If you've ever had to rebuild your life after someone walked away, hit that like button. Your strength deserves recognition. The summer evening at Ravinia Park faded around Maxwell as his mind traveled back 10 years, to the moment that had set this all in motion. That's impossible, Maxwell said, his laughter sharp enough to cut glass. He swirled the bourbon in his crystal tumbler, amber liquid catching the light from the floor-to-ceiling windows of his penthouse. Chicago's skyline glittered beyond Lake Michigan, a testament to the empire he'd built. We were careful. Not careful enough, Sierra replied, her voice steadier than her hands. At 38, pregnancy had been the furthest thing from her mind when she'd begun dating the charismatic hotel magnate. Their 6-month relationship had been intense but measured, at least until that one night when passion had overwhelmed precaution. Maxwell set down his drink, his amusement fading to something colder. Even if it were true, how would I know it's mine? The accusation hung between them, transforming the spacious penthouse into something airless and small. Sierra felt the blood drain from her face. Because unlike what you apparently think of me, I don't see other people, she said quietly. I haven't been with anyone else. Convenient timing, though, isn't it? Maxwell moved toward the windows, his reflection superimposed over the city he was steadily conquering. At 45, he'd built Reed Hospitality Group into a Midwest empire, with luxury properties stretching from Detroit to Minneapolis. Just when I'm about to take the company public. Sierra watched him, this man she'd thought she knew. The Maxwell who'd pursued her relentlessly after they'd met at a charity gala. The Maxwell who'd quoted poetry while they walked along the lakeshore at dawn. The Maxwell who'd whispered that she was different from anyone he'd ever known. That man was nowhere to be found in the cold stranger before her. I don't want your money, she said, dignity straightening her spine. I just thought you deserved to know. Maxwell turned, his handsome face arranged in lines of practiced sympathy. Look, Sierra, We had fun, but this was never going to be permanent. I'm not father material. Never wanted to be. I'm not asking you to be anything, she replied, gathering her coat. The October wind would be bitter off the lake. I just thought you should know you're going to have a child in this world. If you go through with it, he said, the words casual but deliberate. Sierra's hand froze on her purse. What did you just say? Be reasonable. You're a curator at the Art Institute. You work 60-hour weeks. Your apartment barely fits your book collection. He approached, voice softening to the persuasive tone that had closed countless business deals. I'll take care of everything. Discreetly. Then we can both move on with our lives. The magnitude of her misjudgment crashed over Sierra like a wave. This man, this stranger, wasn't just rejecting their child. He was suggesting she end the pregnancy, as if it were an inconvenient typo in a contract. I don't need you to take care of anything, she said, voice trembling not with weakness but with fury. And I don't need your permission to have this baby. Maxwell's expression hardened. Then don't expect anything from me. Not acknowledgement, not support, nothing. The only thing I expected was basic human decency, Sierra replied, moving toward the door. Clearly, that was asking too much. Sierra. His voice stopped her at the threshold. If you pursue this, you're on your own. Completely. I have resources you can't imagine and attorneys who make sure problems like this disappear. She turned, one hand protectively covering her still flat stomach. This isn't a problem, Maxwell. This is a child. Our child. Not mine, he said with finality. Never mine. The door closed behind her with a soft, expensive click, sealing away the life she'd thought might be possible. In the private elevator descending 30 floors, Sierra leaned against the polished wood paneling and closed her eyes. She was alone now, but not completely. Back at Ravinia Park, Maxwell continued to watch the family, unable to look away. Elijah was now pointing something out in the program to both adults, his enthusiasm infectious. The man. Maxwell had heard Sierra call him Gabriel, listened with complete attention, as if the boy's words were the most important thing in the world. It was a kind of focused presence Maxwell had never given anyone, too busy building his empire to truly see the people around him. Even with Sierra, he'd been calculating, strategic, seeing her as an acquisition rather than a partner. He'd pursued her because she was different. Brilliant, independent, not impressed by his wealth, and that had made her a challenge worth conquering. But he'd never really seen her, just as he'd never seen the possibility of the child they'd created together. Now, watching Sierra laugh at something Elijah said, her face illuminated with love, Maxwell felt an unfamiliar tightness in his chest. What would his life have been like if he'd made a different choice that day? If he'd seen the pregnancy not as an inconvenience but as an opportunity to become something more than a successful businessman? As if sensing his gaze, Sierra suddenly looked up, her eyes meeting his across the crowded walkway. For a moment, surprise flickered across her face, followed by something more complex. Not quite anger, not quite pity, but a calm acknowledgement of his presence before she deliberately turned her attention back to her family. Her family, not his, never his. The first months of pregnancy had been the hardest. Sierra battled morning sickness while maintaining her demanding schedule at the Art Institute, determined not to let her colleagues see her struggle. She told no one about Maxwell's rejection, carrying that pain privately alongside the growing life inside her. Her sister Camille was the first person she confided in, 3 months along when the reality of single motherhood could no longer be denied. He said what? Camille had exploded, pacing Sierra's small apartment. That entitled, heartless. It doesn't matter, Sierra interrupted, one hand resting on her slightly rounded belly. I've made my decision. I'm having this baby, with or without him. Camille stopped pacing, her anger softening to concern. Sierra, I'm with you 100%. But have you really thought about what this means? Being a single mother at 38, with your career just taking off. Every day, Sierra admitted. And yes, I'm terrified, but I already love this child. Camille, I can feel them moving, this tiny life that's half me. I can't explain it, but I know we're going to be okay. Camille sat beside her sister, taking her hand. Then we'll make it okay. You're not doing this alone. And she hadn't been alone, not really. Camille had been there through the doctor's appointments, the birthing classes, the frantic middle-of-the-night calls when Sierra panicked about her ability to be both mother and father to her child. Their parents, though initially shocked, had rallied with practical support. Their father building a crib, their mother sewing tiny clothes and blankets. When Elijah Montgomery was born on a snowy February morning, he entered a world where he was already deeply loved by everyone except the man whose features he carried. Sierra had given him her surname without hesitation. Maxwell Reed would have no claim on this child he'd so casually discarded. She'd expected him to contest the birth certificate, to demand a paternity test, to fight her decision out of pride if nothing else. But there had been nothing. No acknowledgement, no legal action, no attempt at contact. It was as if Elijah didn't exist in Maxwell's world. And gradually Maxwell ceased to exist in theirs. The early years were a blur of exhaustion and joy. Sierra took a 3-month maternity leave, then returned to work with Elijah in tow, a portable bassinet tucked discreetly in her office. Her director, a mother of 3 herself, had been unexpectedly supportive. "Bring him in whenever you need to," she'd said. "The Renaissance masters won't mind a baby's cries. Might liven up the place." As Elijah grew from infant to toddler to little boy, Sierra built their life with careful intention. Their small apartment became a haven of books, music, and art. Weekends were for adventures, the zoo, the lakefront, museums with interactive children's sections. She read to him every night, different voices for each character, building worlds of imagination to compensate for the realities they couldn't change. By the time Elijah was 6, they had settled into a rhythm that worked. Sierra had been promoted to senior curator, with a modest salary increase that allowed for occasional luxuries. Piano lessons for Elijah, who showed an early aptitude for music. A weekend trip to Michigan's sandy shores. New winter coats instead of secondhand. They were making it work. They were happy. And if sometimes, late at night, Sierra wondered what Elijah was missing without a father, she reminded herself that no father was better than one who didn't want him. She had no way of knowing that everything was about to change on an ordinary autumn afternoon in Lincoln Park. Back at Ravinia, Maxwell watched as Gabriel placed a protective hand on Elijah's shoulder, guiding him through the crowd toward the exit. The gesture was casual, instinctive, the unconscious movement of a man accustomed to safeguarding his child. It spoke of years of such moments, a history of care that Maxwell had forfeited. As they moved away, Maxwell finally forced himself to step forward, to follow at a distance. He told himself he just wanted one more glimpse, one more moment to absorb the reality of the son he'd never known. But deeper than that was a desperate need to understand what he was seeing. This family that could have included him, this life he'd so casually discarded. Who was this man who had stepped into the role Maxwell had rejected? What kind of father had he become to Elijah? What kind of partner to Sierra? The answers, Maxwell suspected, would only deepen his growing sense of loss. But he couldn't look away. Not yet. The family paused near the parking area, still deep in conversation about the concert. Maxwell hung back, partially concealed by a large oak tree, close enough to hear fragments of their exchange. The way she interpreted the second movement, Elijah was saying, his hands moving expressively, it was so much more emotional than the recording we have at home. That's the magic of live performance, Gabriel replied. Each interpretation tells a different story. Like how you read books differently than Mom does, Elijah said, making the connection with the quick insight that reminded Maxwell of himself at that age. Gabriel laughed, a warm sound that carried across the evening air. Exactly. Your mom finds the historical context. I find the literary symbolism, and I just want to know what happens next. Elijah finished, grinning. Sierra reached up to ruffle her son's curls, now almost at her own height. The eternal question of a curious mind. The easy affection between them, the shared references to their life together, struck Maxwell with unexpected force. This wasn't just a family unit. This was a tapestry of inside jokes, shared experiences, and mutual understanding woven over years. Something that couldn't be bought or manufactured, only earned through presence and time. Time he had thrown away. As they walked toward their car, Maxwell remained rooted in place, watching until they disappeared from view. Only then did he turn toward the VIP parking section where his driver had been waiting for nearly half an hour. "Sorry for the delay," he said mechanically as he slid into the back seat of the Bentley. "No problem, sir." "Where to?" Maxwell stared out the window, the question hanging between them. Where to, indeed? Back to his empty penthouse? To the office to work until midnight as usual? To one of his hotels to be recognized, catered to, surrounded by people who wanted something from him? "Just drive," he said finally. "I need to think." 6 years earlier, Sierra sat on a bench in Lincoln Park, watching her son climb the jungle gym with fierce determination. Elijah's dark curls caught the late September sunlight, his brown skin glowing golden in the afternoon sun. "Mom, watch this," he called, hanging upside down, his gap-toothed smile radiant. "I see you, my brave one," she called back, heart swelling. "Be careful," a deep voice beside her asked. "Is this seat taken?" Sierra looked up to find a tall man with kind eyes and a gentle smile. "It's all yours," she replied, shifting to make room. "Thanks." He sat, setting a worn leather messenger bag between them. "Beautiful day. Perfect park weather," she agreed, keeping her eyes on Elijah as he navigated the monkey bars. "Your son?" the stranger asked, following her gaze. "Yes, Elijah. He's fearless," the man observed with admiration. "Reminds me of my nephew." Something in his voice, a warmth, an absence of agenda, made Sierra turn toward him. He was handsome in an understated way, with close-cropped hair graying at the temples and laugh lines framing thoughtful eyes. "I'm Gabriel," he said, offering his hand. "Gabriel Washington." "Sierra Montgomery." His handshake was firm but gentle. "Are you here with your nephew?" Gabriel shook his head. "Just enjoying my lunch break. I teach at the community college a few blocks over. English literature." "Hence the messenger bag bursting with papers?" He laughed, patting the worn leather. "Guilty as charged. Freshman composition essays. Not exactly light reading." "Mom," Elijah called, racing toward them. "Can I have my snack now?" "Of course, baby." Sierra reached into her tote for the container of apple slices and cheese. Elijah skidded to a stop, noticing Gabriel. He studied the stranger with unabashed curiosity. "Who are you?" "Elijah," Sierra admonished gently. "Manners." "It's okay," Gabriel smiled. "I'm Gabriel. I teach people about books." Elijah's eyes widened. "My mom loves books. She reads me stories every night, even the long ones." "Is that so?" Gabriel glanced at Sierra with new interest. "She knows all the voices," Elijah continued, accepting his snack container. "Even the dragon ones." "Dragon voices are very important," Gabriel agreed solemnly. "You can't properly tell a dragon story without them." Elijah nodded vigorously. "That's what I said." Sierra watched this exchange with surprise. Elijah was usually reserved with strangers, a caution she'd both encouraged for safety and sometimes worried about. Yet here he was, chatting comfortably with this man they'd just met. "Are you a dad?" Elijah asked between bites of apple. The directness of children, Sierra thought, feeling heat rise to her cheeks. "Elijah, that's a personal question." "It's fine," Gabriel assured her. "No, I'm not a dad, but I'm an uncle to 3 amazing kids." "Do you read them stories too?" "Every chance I get, with all the voices." Elijah nodded approvingly, then turned to Sierra. "Can I go back to the slide?" 10 more minutes. Then we need to head home for dinner." As Elijah raced back to the playground, Sierra turned to Gabriel with an apologetic smile. "Sorry about the interrogation." "Don't be. He's delightful." Gabriel's expression was warm. "Smart too. You can tell by the questions he asks." "He gets that from—" Sierra stopped herself. "From his father" was what she'd almost said, an automatic response she'd trained herself to give when people commented on Elijah's intelligence or charm, as if she needed to acknowledge Maxwell's genetic contribution, even in his complete absence. "From you, I'd imagine," Gabriel finished for her, misreading her hesitation. "Are you a teacher too?" Grateful for the redirect, Sierra shook her head. "Curator at the Art Institute. Renaissance and Baroque paintings." "Impressive," Gabriel said, and she could tell he meant it. "I take my students there every semester. The power of visual storytelling alongside literary narratives. Let me know next time you come. I'd be happy to give your class a special tour." The words surprised her as they left her mouth. Sierra wasn't usually so forward, especially not with men she'd just met. The years of single motherhood had made her cautious, protective of the fragile ecosystem she'd built for herself and Elijah. Gabriel's smile deepened. "I might take you up on that." He glanced at his watch and sighed. "Unfortunately, 30 freshmen await my return. Their essays on Toni Morrison won't grade themselves, much as I might wish it." He stood, shouldering his bag. "It was really nice meeting you, Sierra. And Elijah." "You too," she replied, meaning it. Gabriel hesitated, then asked, "Would it be completely inappropriate if I asked for your number? Maybe we could continue this conversation over coffee sometime." Sierra felt a flutter of something long dormant. Interest, possibility, fear. "I'd like that," she heard herself say, surprising them both. As they exchanged numbers, Elijah came racing back, cheeks flushed with exertion. "Is it time to go home?" "Yes, baby. Say goodbye to Mr. Washington." "Bye, Mr. Washington." Elijah waved enthusiastically. "Will you be here tomorrow?" Gabriel crouched to Elijah's level. "Not tomorrow, but maybe I'll see you again sometime. Keep practicing those dragon voices. Okay?" "I will," Elijah promised solemnly. As Gabriel walked away, Elijah turned to Sierra with the unfiltered honesty of childhood. "I like him, Mom. He has nice eyes." Sierra watched Gabriel's retreating figure, tall and steady against the autumn trees. "Yes," she agreed softly. "He does." In his Bentley, Maxwell stared unseeing at the Chicago skyline as they drove through the night. The boy's face, Elijah's face, kept appearing in his mind. Not just the teenager he'd glimpsed tonight, but the child he must have been. The infant he'd never held. The toddler taking first steps he'd never witnessed. The kindergartner starting school without a father's reassuring presence. All the moments, large and small, that made up a childhood. Moments Maxwell had discarded as casually as signing off on a business deal that no longer interested him. "Sir." The driver's voice broke through his thoughts. "We've been driving for almost an hour. Do you have a destination in mind?" Maxwell blinked, realizing they'd been circling the city, while his mind traveled through a past that never was and a present that could have been. "Take me home," he said finally. But as the car turned toward his penthouse, Maxwell knew with sudden clarity that he'd never built a home. He'd built properties, investments, a corporate empire, but not a home. Not a place where someone waited for his return, where his presence mattered beyond what he could provide financially. He thought of the way Elijah had looked at Gabriel, with complete trust and admiration. The way Sierra had leaned into the man's presence, comfortable and secure. The three of them moving through the world as a unit, connected by something Maxwell had never valued until tonight. Family. Real family, not the superficial connections he maintained with distant relatives or the transactional relationships that filled his social calendar. For the first time in his meticulously controlled life, Maxwell Reed felt the full weight of regret. 3 months after meeting Gabriel in the park, Sierra stood in her kitchen, phone pressed to her ear as she stirred pasta sauce with her free hand. "I'm just saying, Sierra, it's been 3 months. Her sister Camille's voice came through the speaker. "That's significant." "We're taking it slow," Sierra replied, tasting the sauce. More basil, she decided. "It's complicated when you have a child." Elijah adores him. This was undeniably true. Since that first meeting in the park, Gabriel had gradually become a steady presence in their lives. Weekend outings to museums and bookstores, movie nights where he and Elijah built elaborate blanket forts in Sierra's living room, dinners where Gabriel cooked Jamaican dishes from his grandmother's recipes, filling Sierra's apartment with spices and stories. That's part of what scares me, Sierra admitted, lowering her voice though Elijah was engrossed in Legos in the living room. What if it doesn't work out? Elijah's never had a man in his life before. I don't want him to get attached and then hurt. And what about you? Camille asked gently. Are you afraid of getting hurt too? Sierra sighed, leaning against the counter. Of course I am. Maxwell was a calculating, cold-hearted man who doesn't deserve to be mentioned in the same breath as Gabriel, Camille finished firmly. Seriously, Sierra, they're nothing alike. I know that. Logically, I know that. And she did. Where Maxwell had been all polished surfaces and hidden agendas, Gabriel was authentic to his core. He taught literature not because it was prestigious, but because he genuinely believed stories could change lives. He volunteered teaching creative writing at a youth center in his Southside neighborhood. He called his mother every Sunday without fail. Then what's holding you back? Camille pressed. Because from where I'm standing, you found a good man who adores both you and your son. Do you know how rare that is? The doorbell rang before Sierra could answer. That's him now, she said. We're having dinner. Just promise me you'll get out of your own way, Sierra. You deserve happiness. Both of you do. After hanging up, Sierra took a deep breath and went to open the door. Gabriel stood there, a bouquet of wildflowers in one hand and a wrapped gift in the other. For the lady of the house, he said, presenting the flowers with a flourish. And for the young sir, a token of appreciation for allowing me to join your dinner table yet again. Before Sierra could respond, Elijah came barreling down the hallway. Gabriel, did you bring the book you promised? Even better. Gabriel handed him the package. This one's yours to keep. Elijah tore open the wrapping to reveal a beautifully illustrated edition of Where the Wild Things Are. His eyes widened. This is the best one. With all the pictures. I thought we could read it together after dinner, Gabriel suggested, hanging his coat on the rack by the door. A gesture so domestic it made Sierra's heart catch. Yes. Elijah hugged the book to his chest, then impulsively wrapped his arms around Gabriel's waist. Thank you. Gabriel's expression as he returned the hug, tender, protective, a little awed, made something shift inside Sierra. This wasn't just a man being kind to her son. This was a man falling in love with her child, the same way he was falling in love with her. If you know someone who stepped up to love a child that wasn't biologically theirs, tag them in the comments. These everyday heroes deserve our appreciation. Later, after Elijah was asleep and they sat together on her small balcony, mugs of tea warming their hands against the December chill, Sierra found herself telling Gabriel the truth. All of it. Maxwell Reed is Elijah's father, she said quietly, watching his face for reaction. The hotel magnate. Gabriel nodded slowly. I wondered. Elijah has his profile in certain lights. You know who Maxwell Reed is? I read the business section, Gabriel said with a small smile. Plus, his new hotel downtown is hard to miss. Tallest building on that block. Sierra stared into her tea. He wanted nothing to do with us. Denied Elijah was his, suggested I end the pregnancy, threatened legal action if I pursued child support. The words still burned, even after all this time. I decided it was better for Elijah to have no father than one who resented his existence. Gabriel was quiet for a long moment. Has he ever tried to make contact? See Elijah? Never. Not once in almost 7 years. Sierra looked up, meeting Gabriel's eyes. I used to check the society pages, prepare myself for the day Maxwell got married, had children he would acknowledge. But it never happened. Just an endless parade of models and socialites, none lasting more than a few months. His loss, Gabriel said simply. The greatest loss of his life, though he's too blind to see it. The conviction in Gabriel's voice made tears spring to Sierra's eyes. That's what I tell myself on the hard days. But sometimes I worry that I've deprived Elijah of something essential. A father's love. Gabriel set down his mug and took her hands in his. Sierra, you haven't deprived Elijah of anything. You've protected him from rejection and given him a home full of love and security. That's everything. But a boy needs people who love him unconditionally, Gabriel interrupted gently. Gender doesn't determine the ability to provide that love. Sierra studied their joined hands, her slender fingers entwined with his broader ones. When Elijah asked you if you were a dad that day in the park, I nearly died of embarrassment. But now I wonder if he was asking for a reason. Gabriel's expression softened. Children have an instinct for what they need. And what about you? Sierra asked, heart pounding. Is this what you need? A ready-made family with all our complications. What I need, Gabriel said, reaching up to brush a tear from her cheek, is you. Both of you exactly as you are. No changes, no simplifications, no revisions to the story. The English professor speaks in literary metaphors, she teased, though her voice trembled. Occupational hazard, he smiled, then grew serious. I love you, Sierra. I think I've been falling in love with you since that day in the park. And I love Elijah too, not as a package deal, but as his own person. This incredible little boy who sees dragons in stories and asks questions that make me think differently about the world. Sierra felt something long frozen inside her begin to thaw. I'm scared, she admitted. Not of you, but of this. Of trusting again. Of letting someone else into our lives who could leave. I understand that fear, Gabriel said. I can't promise we'll never face challenges. But I can promise I won't walk away from them. Or from you. He leaned forward, his forehead touching hers. I'm not asking for any decisions tonight. Just know that I'm here, and I'm not going anywhere unless you ask me to. In the quiet of the winter night, with Chicago glittering around them and her son sleeping peacefully inside, Sierra made a choice. She closed the distance between them and kissed Gabriel Washington, tasting promise and possibility on his lips. Back in the present, Maxwell's Bentley pulled up to his building, the doorman rushing forward to open his car door. He stepped out mechanically, nodding his thanks, and walked through the marble lobby to the private elevator that would take him to his penthouse. The same elevator Sierra had ridden down 10 years ago, her world shattered by his casual cruelty. As the doors closed and the elevator ascended, Maxwell stared at his reflection in the polished brass panel. He looked successful, bespoke suit, designer watch, the confident posture of a man accustomed to commanding rooms. But tonight, for the first time, he saw something else beneath the carefully cultivated image. Emptiness. What had his success cost him? What had he sacrificed in pursuit of more properties, more wealth, more power? The elevator doors opened directly into his penthouse, revealing the expansive space with its museum-quality art and panoramic views. Maxwell walked to the bar and poured himself the same bourbon he'd been drinking the night Sierra told him about the pregnancy. He took it to the window, standing in almost the exact spot where he'd stood a decade ago, looking out at the city he'd conquered while losing something far more valuable. Not mine, he'd said about Elijah. Never mine. And he'd been right, though not in the way he'd intended. The boy would never be his, not because of any question of biology, but because Maxwell had forfeited that privilege. Someone else had earned it instead. Have you ever witnessed someone realize too late what they threw away? Share your thoughts in the comments below. The years unfolded with a gentle rhythm that Sierra had never thought possible. When Elijah was 8, after a year of careful integration into their lives, Sierra and Elijah moved into Gabriel's more spacious brownstone in Hyde Park. They married in a small ceremony at the Art Institute Gardens when Elijah was 9, the boy proudly serving as best man for both of them. Do you, Gabriel James Washington, take Sierra Elizabeth Montgomery to be your lawfully wedded wife? The officiant asked under a bower of spring blossoms. I do, Gabriel replied, his eyes never leaving Sierra's. And do you, Sierra Elizabeth Montgomery, take Gabriel James Washington to be your lawfully wedded husband? I do, she said, her voice clear and certain. The rings, please, the officiant prompted. Elijah stepped forward solemnly, the small velvet pillow held carefully in his hands. As Gabriel and Sierra exchanged rings, Elijah beamed up at them, his joy uncontained. "By the power vested in me by the state of Illinois, I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss the bride." As Gabriel leaned in to kiss her, Sierra was overwhelmed by the journey that had brought them to this moment. From that chance meeting in the park to this day, surrounded by friends and family who had supported her through the darkest times and now celebrated this new beginning. The reception was intimate, held in the museum's garden terrace. As twilight descended, fairy lights twinkled in the trees and soft jazz played while guests mingled and congratulated the new family. "May I have this dance?" Gabriel asked Elijah formally, bowing slightly. Elijah giggled and took his hand, and Gabriel led him in an exaggerated waltz around the dance floor, dipping him dramatically to peals of laughter. Watching them, Camille sidled up to Sierra. "Look at that," she said softly. "That man was born to be a father." "Yes," Sierra agreed, her heart full. "He was." When Elijah was 10, Gabriel formally adopted him. A day marked by tears and celebration and Elijah's solemn declaration that this was just making official what was already true in our hearts. The judge, a kind-faced woman with silver hair, had smiled at Elijah's words. "That's beautifully put, young man, and I agree completely." She signed the final document with a flourish. "Congratulations, Elijah Washington. It's official." Elijah had thrown his arms around Gabriel's neck, and Gabriel had lifted him off the ground in a bear hug, his eyes shining with unshed tears. "Thank you for choosing me, buddy," he'd whispered. "Thank you for choosing us," Elijah had whispered back. Through it all, Maxwell Reed remained a ghost, a name never mentioned, a presence never felt. Sierra had long since stopped checking for him in society pages or business news. Her life, their life, had moved forward without him, building something beautiful from what had once been pain. Until the evening at Ravinia Park. The Chicago Symphony Orchestra was performing Dvorak, and Elijah, now a passionate violinist himself, had been looking forward to the concert for months. At 10, he was tall and lanky, with the same dark curls and thoughtful eyes he'd had as a child, but now with a quiet confidence that made Sierra's heart swell with pride. "Dad, can we get there early enough for the pre-concert talk?" Elijah asked as they walked toward the festival grounds, his excitement palpable. "The first violinist is discussing her interpretation of the New World Symphony." "Absolutely," Gabriel replied, checking his watch. "We've got plenty of time." Sierra watched them together, these two who had found each other through her, but had built their own relationship, deep and true. Gabriel had been the one to recognize Elijah's musical talent, to encourage it without pressure, to sit through countless squeaky practice sessions until beauty emerged from the strings. He'd been the one to research violin teachers, to drive Elijah to lessons, to beam with unrestrained pride at every recital. He had been, in every way that mattered, Elijah's father. The pre-concert talk was held in a small pavilion adjacent to the main venue. Elijah sat on the edge of his seat, absorbing every word as the first violinist explained her approach to Dvorak's most famous symphony. "The New World Symphony speaks to the immigrant experience," the violinist explained. "The longing for home while creating something new." Dvorak was Czech, writing in America, incorporating both European classical traditions and the spirituals and folk music he heard here. "Like code switching," Elijah whispered to Gabriel. "Like how you talk about in your cultural identity class." Gabriel nodded, impressed by the connection. "Exactly. Music as cultural conversation." When the Q&A portion began, Elijah's hand shot up immediately. The violinist pointed to him with a smile. "I noticed in recordings that most violinists use a lot of vibrato in the second movement's main theme, but you used a cleaner tone with more bow pressure instead. Was that a deliberate choice to change the emotional quality?" The violinist's eyebrows rose in appreciation. "That's an excellent observation. Yes, it was very deliberate. I wanted to create a sense of yearning without sentimentality. The cleaner tone feels more honest to me, more vulnerable." Elijah nodded thoughtfully. "It made me think of someone standing alone in a new place, remembering home but not in a sad way. More like carrying it with them." That's exactly what I was trying to convey, the violinist said, clearly impressed. What's your name? Elijah Washington. Well, Elijah Washington, you have a remarkable ear. Do you play? Yes, ma'am. Violin for 6 years now. Keep it up. The world needs sensitive musicians who understand that technique serves emotion, not the other way around. After the talk, as they made their way to their seats for the concert, Gabriel squeezed Elijah's shoulder. I'm proud of you asking such a thoughtful question. I was nervous, Elijah admitted. But you always say the best questions come from really listening, not just waiting to speak. And you listened beautifully, Sierra added, linking her arm through Elijah's, both to the music and to what she was saying about it. The concert itself was transcendent. Sierra found herself watching Elijah as much as the orchestra, seeing how he leaned forward during complex passages, his fingers subtly moving as if playing along, his face reflecting every emotional shift in the music. This was the gift Gabriel had given him. Not just lessons and instruments, but permission to feel deeply, to express those feelings, to connect with something larger than himself. Maxwell might have provided financial advantages, private schools, exclusive opportunities. But Gabriel had offered something far more valuable, the courage to be fully himself. After the performance, as they made their way through the crowd toward the exit, Elijah darted ahead, program in hand. Where's he off to? Sierra asked, amused by his sudden burst of energy. I think they're doing a signing with some of the musicians, Gabriel replied. He mentioned wanting to ask the first violinist about her bowing technique. They followed at a more leisurely pace, giving Elijah his moment of independence. When they caught up, he was practically vibrating with excitement. Dad, the first violinist signed my program. She said I asked the best question during the Q&A. That's fantastic, Elijah, Gabriel replied, his pride evident in every word. What did you ask her? As Elijah launched into an enthusiastic explanation of bow pressure and string resonance, Sierra felt a prickle at the back of her neck, the sensation of being watched. She glanced up, scanning the crowd, and froze. Maxwell Reed stood 20 feet away, his gaze fixed on them with an intensity that was almost physical. He looked older, of course, silver threading through his dark hair, lines etched more deeply around his eyes, but still unmistakably himself. Still handsome, still commanding, still exuding the aura of wealth and power that had once seemed so alluring to her. Their eyes met across the crowded walkway, and Sierra felt a strange calm settle over her. There was no panic, no anger, no desire to shield Elijah from this man who had rejected him before he was even born. Just a quiet acknowledgement that their paths had crossed again, briefly and meaninglessly. She turned deliberately back to her family, her real family, and placed her hand in the crook of Gabriel's arm. Ready to head home? She asked, smiling up at the man who had chosen them, who continued to choose them every day. Absolutely, Gabriel replied, completely unaware of the man watching them. I think this calls for ice cream on the way. What do you say, Elijah? Yes, Elijah agreed enthusiastically. Can we go to that place with the weird flavors? Artisanal, Gabriel corrected with mock seriousness. They're artisanal flavors. Weird, Elijah insisted, grinning. Remember the lavender honey one that tasted like soap? As they walked away, laughing together, Sierra didn't look back. She didn't need to. Whatever Maxwell might be feeling as he watched his biological son call another man dad was his burden to bear, not hers. She had long ago released the weight of his rejection, transforming it into the foundation for something far more precious than anything he could have offered. Maxwell Reed stood motionless as the family disappeared into the crowd. His driver had been waiting for 20 minutes, but he couldn't bring himself to move, still processing what he had just witnessed. His son. The boy was unmistakably his son. The same profile, the same animated gestures when excited, even the same slight furrow between his brows when concentrating, all mirrors of Maxwell's own mannerisms. Except this boy Elijah had something Maxwell had never possessed. An openness, a warmth, a genuine connection to the people around him. The way he looked at the man he called father, with complete trust and admiration, struck Maxwell with unexpected force. That could have been me, he thought, the realization both bitter and illuminating. That should have been me. But it wasn't. By his own choice, by his own arrogant dismissal a decade ago, he had forfeited that right. The man walking beside Sierra, this Gabriel who had stepped into the role Maxwell had rejected, had earned the title that biology alone could never bestow. As Maxwell finally turned toward the parking lot, he felt something shift inside him. Not quite regret, which implied the possibility of change or redemption, but a clearer understanding of what his choices had cost him. Not just a son, but the chance to become someone better than he was. Someone worthy of being called Dad, with that same look of love and trust he had just witnessed. It was, he realized with sudden clarity, the most expensive thing he had ever lost. And unlike the hotels, the properties, the business deals that had consumed his life, it was the one thing his wealth could never reclaim. 3 days after the Ravinia encounter, Sierra was working in her office at the Art Institute when her assistant knocked on the door. "There's a delivery for you," she said, carrying in an elegant arrangement of white orchids. "Shall I put them on your desk?" "Thank you, Meredith." Sierra accepted the small envelope nestled among the blooms, assuming they were from Gabriel, who occasionally surprised her with flowers for no particular reason. The card inside contained just 3 lines. "I saw what I missed, what I threw away. You built something beautiful. I won't interfere." There was no signature, but none was needed. Sierra stared at the precise handwriting, so familiar even after all these years. Maxwell's acknowledgement, too late to matter, too little to change anything, still stirred something unexpected within her. Not forgiveness, exactly, but a sense of closure she hadn't realized she still needed. She slipped the card into her desk drawer, then picked up her phone to call Gabriel. "Hey, beautiful," he answered, his voice warm even through the phone line. "Everything okay?" "Everything's perfect," she replied, meaning it completely. "I was just thinking about you and wanted to hear your voice. Are you still picking Elijah up from his lesson?" "On my way there now. We thought we'd stop by that new bookstore on the way home. Any requests?" "Surprise me," she said, smiling. "You always do." After hanging up, Sierra looked at the orchids one last time before calling her assistant. "Meredith, would you mind taking these down to the reception area? They'd brighten up the front desk." As Meredith carried the flowers away, Sierra turned back to her work, the momentary intrusion of the past already fading. Maxwell Reed had once laughed when she told him he was going to be a father. 10 years later, he had watched his son call another man Dad. It was, Sierra thought, exactly as it should be. In his corner office overlooking the Chicago River, Maxwell sat at his desk, staring at the untouched stack of contracts his assistant had left for his review. For 3 days, he'd gone through the motions of his usual routine, meetings, calls, decisions that affected millions of dollars, but his mind kept returning to Ravinia Park, to Elijah, to the family that could have included him. He'd sent the orchids on impulse, a gesture he wasn't entirely sure he understood himself. Not an apology. What words could possibly atone for a decade of absence? Not a peace offering. He had no right to ask for peace. Perhaps simply an acknowledgement, both to Sierra and to himself, of the truth they now shared. He had made a terrible mistake, and she had built a beautiful life despite it. His intercom buzzed. "Mr. Reed, the board members are assembled in the conference room for the quarterly review." "Thank you, Janet. I'll be right there." Maxwell stood, straightening his tie and gathering the portfolio he'd prepared. Life continued. Business demanded attention. The empire he'd built required constant maintenance. But as he walked toward the conference room, he found himself wondering, for the first time in his driven life, if the empire had been worth the cost. The Washington family's Sunday morning ritual had evolved over the years, but remained centered around togetherness. Gabriel made his grandmother's Johnny cakes while Sierra prepared fresh fruit and Elijah set the table. They ate leisurely, sharing plans for the day and stories from the week. This particular Sunday, Elijah seemed quieter than usual, pushing his blueberries around his plate with unusual concentration. "Everything okay, buddy?" Gabriel asked, passing the maple syrup. Elijah hesitated. I've been thinking about something, but I'm not sure if I should bring it up. Sierra and Gabriel exchanged glances. At 10, Elijah had become more thoughtful, sometimes wrestling with questions internally before sharing them. This table's always a safe space for thoughts, Gabriel reminded him gently. No matter what they are. Elijah took a deep breath. I've been thinking about my biological father. The words hung in the air. They had never hidden the truth from Elijah. As he grew older, they had answered his questions honestly but without bitterness, allowing him to form his own understanding of his origins. What about him? Sierra asked carefully. I think I saw him at Ravinia, the night of the concert. Elijah looked up, meeting his mother's surprised gaze. There was a man watching us. He looked like the pictures I've seen in magazines, and he was staring at us in a way that felt personal. Sierra set down her fork, momentarily speechless. She'd had no idea Elijah had noticed Maxwell that night. Why didn't you say something? She asked. Elijah shrugged. I wasn't sure at first, and then I didn't want to ruin our night. It was such a perfect evening. He turned to Gabriel. And I didn't want you to think I was, interested in him or something. Gabriel reached across the table, placing his hand over Elijah's. Elijah, your curiosity about your biological father is completely natural. It doesn't threaten our relationship or hurt my feelings. You're allowed to have questions about where you came from. He's right, Sierra added. We've always wanted you to feel free to ask about him. I know, Elijah said, and you've always been honest. But this felt different. Actually seeing him, knowing he was seeing me. He paused. Did you notice him too, Mom? Sierra nodded. Yes, I did. And you didn't say anything either. I didn't want to complicate a beautiful evening, she admitted. Maybe that was wrong. I should have checked with you afterward. Asked if you'd seen him too. Elijah was quiet for a moment, processing. Has he ever tried to contact me before? In all these years? No, Sierra said gently. That was the first time I've seen him since before you were born. Until the flowers, Gabriel said quietly. Sierra looked at him in surprise. The orchids that came to your office this week, Gabriel explained. They were from him, weren't they? Sierra nodded slowly. How did you know? You've been a little distracted since they arrived. And you sent them to the reception desk instead of bringing them home. You never do that with flowers I send. Elijah looked between them. He sent you flowers? Why? Sierra hesitated, then decided on complete honesty. I think it was his way of acknowledging what he saw at Ravinia, what he missed by not being part of your life. Did he want something? Ask to meet me or anything? No, Sierra assured him. His note just said he saw what he missed, that we'd built something beautiful, and that he wouldn't interfere. Elijah absorbed this, his expression thoughtful. That's actually kind of decent of him, to recognize he doesn't have a place in our lives now. It is, Gabriel agreed. It shows respect for the family we've built. Do you want to meet him? Sierra asked carefully. Because if you do, that would be completely understandable. We could arrange something. Elijah considered the question seriously, then slowly shook his head. I don't think so. Not now anyway. Maybe someday out of curiosity. But he looked at Gabriel, his expression softening. I already have a dad, a real one. I don't need another. Gabriel's eyes glistened. Thank you, son. Besides, Elijah added with a small smile, he had his chance. He chose not to take it. That's on him, not on us. Sierra marveled at her son's wisdom, his ability to process complex emotions with such clarity. When did you get so grown up? She asked, only half joking. I had good teachers, Elijah replied, looking between the two people who had raised him with such intentional love. The conversation shifted to other topics. Elijah's upcoming recital, Gabriel's summer teaching schedule, plans for their annual Michigan vacation. The moment of tension passed, absorbed into the fabric of their family life. neither ignored nor allowed to overshadow the bonds they'd built. Later, as Sierra and Gabriel washed dishes side by side, he bumped her hip gently with his. "You okay?" "Yes," she said, and meant it. "It's strange, but seeing Maxwell again, getting that note, it feels like the final chapter of an old story, one I'm glad to have finished." "You know," Gabriel said thoughtfully, "in literature we talk about the difference between circular and linear narratives. Some stories end where they began, with the character unchanged. Others move forward, with the character transformed by their journey." "And which am I?" Sierra asked, smiling at his inevitable literary reference. "Definitely linear," Gabriel replied, kissing her temple. "The Sierra who walked out of that penthouse 10 years ago has become someone new. Stronger, more certain, surrounded by love she built herself." "We built," she corrected, leaning into him. "I couldn't have done it alone." "You were doing beautifully before I came along," Gabriel reminded her. "I just had the good fortune to join the journey." From the living room came the sound of Elijah's violin, the opening notes of the Dvorak symphony they'd heard at Ravinia. The music filled their home, warm, complex, speaking of both longing and belonging. "He's getting really good," Gabriel observed. "Yes," Sierra agreed. "He is." Maxwell Reed stood outside the concert hall, checking his watch with practiced impatience. The Chicago Symphony's annual gala performance had just concluded, and the city's elite were streaming out into the summer evening, exchanging air kisses and making dinner plans. He hadn't planned to attend tonight, but when he'd seen Elijah Washington's name in the program as one of the featured young artists in the pre-concert showcase, something had compelled him to buy a ticket. Now, standing in the shadows of a marble column, he watched as Sierra and Gabriel emerged from the hall, their faces alight with pride. Behind them came Elijah. Now 2 years had passed since that night at Ravinia. 2 years in which Maxwell had kept his promise not to interfere, while quietly following Elijah's progress through concert programs and the occasional mention in local arts coverage. The boy, a young man now, was making a name for himself as a promising violinist, recently accepted to the Juilliard School on a full scholarship. Maxwell had considered making an anonymous donation to Juilliard in Elijah's name, but ultimately decided against it. The young man had earned his place through talent and hard work. He didn't need Maxwell's money or influence, had never needed it, thanks to the parents who had nurtured his gifts with love rather than privilege. As the family moved toward the exit, Maxwell stepped back deeper into the shadows. He hadn't come to make contact, only to witness from a distance the remarkable person his biological son had become without him. But as they passed, Elijah suddenly paused, his head turning slightly in Maxwell's direction. For a brief moment, their eyes met across the crowded foyer. Elijah's curious but unafraid, Maxwell's surprised at being noticed. Elijah gave a small, almost imperceptible nod, not quite acknowledgement, not quite greeting, but something in between. A recognition, perhaps, that he knew who Maxwell was and had made his peace with that knowledge. Then he turned away, catching up to Gabriel and Sierra, slipping his arms through theirs as they walked out into the Chicago night, a family complete unto themselves. Maxwell remained in place long after they'd gone, something unfamiliar expanding in his chest. It took him a moment to identify the feeling, so foreign to his usual emotional landscape. Pride. Not in anything he had done, but in what Elijah had become despite his absence. In the strength Sierra had shown in raising him alone until Gabriel came along. In the family they had built from what could have been merely damage and loss. As he finally turned to leave, Maxwell understood with perfect clarity what he had learned from the son he would never know. That true wealth had nothing to do with acquisitions or achievements. It lay in the connections we nurture, the love we give freely, and the family we choose to build, whether by blood or by choice. The man who had earned the title was the one who deserved to hear it spoken with love. The man who had walked away had forfeited that privilege forever. And the woman who had once stood alone in an elevator, terrified of the future, had found her way to a life richer and more fulfilling than anything she could have imagined that day. Sometimes the most beautiful journeys begin with the most painful first steps. And sometimes the people who walk away from us are unknowingly clearing the path for those who are meant to stay. If this story touched your heart, subscribe to Timeless Love Tales with Mr. Harrison for more powerful stories of resilience, redemption, and the true meaning of family.